Imagine walking into a glittering car dealership. Bright lights bouncing off polished hoods. Luxury cars lined like jewels, each one gleaming with power and prestige. And then, imagine being laughed at. Dismissed. Thrown out, simply because of the clothes you wear, the shoes on your feet, or the bag in your hand. That is exactly what happened to a woman who only wanted to ask about a car. She was mocked, humiliated, and told to leave, as though she did not belong. But what the salesman did not know was who she truly was. Because the very next day, the silence outside that same dealership shattered when a black Rolls Royce Phantom rolled to a stop at the entrance. Out stepped a man in a tailored suit, a billionaire with power in every step. And from the other side of the car, emerged the same woman they had kicked out only hours before. What happened next left the entire dealership trembling. Respect flipped to fear. Laughter turned to shame. And the lesson that unfolded in that courtyard is one the staff would never forget. Stay with me, because this is not just a story about wealth. This is about dignity, humiliation, and the shocking way tables can turn when the truth is finally revealed. A simple woman kicked out of car dealership. Next day, her billionaire husband's Rolls Royce arrives. The glass doors slid open with a sharp hiss. The woman stepped inside, her worn sandals squeaking against the polished tiles. Rows of sleek cars gleamed beneath white fluorescent lights, each one a mirror of perfection. The air smelled of leather, polish, and money. She tightened her grip on her canvas bag, the straps rough against her calloused hands. Her eyes lingered on a silver sedan, its chrome edges catching the light. A salesman approached, his smile thin and practiced. "Can I help you?" His gaze swept over her clothes, the faded dress, the fraying hem. She spoke softly, asking about prices. His expression hardened, the smile slipping into irritation. "We do not have anything in your budget," he said, his voice sharp like a blade. Other salesmen turned, whispering, their laughter faint but cruel. Her cheeks burned. The room seemed hotter, the lights harsher, every sound louder. She tried to explain, but the salesman cut her off. "Madam, please leave. You are wasting time." The security guard shifted his weight, already moving closer. Her throat tightened, words refusing to form. The woman turned away, the weight of humiliation pressing heavy on her chest. The cool air outside struck her face, but it did not cool the sting of rejection. She walked home slowly, her shadow stretching thin against the pavement. That night, silence filled her small kitchen. She said nothing to her husband. The next morning, the street outside the dealership fell quiet. A black Rolls Royce Phantom slid to a stop at the entrance, its engine a low growl. The door opened with a heavy click. Polished shoes touched the ground. A man stepped out, tall, his tailored suit sharp against the sunlight. Every head turned. The salesman froze, his practiced smile failing him. The woman stepped out of the other side of the car, her presence calm yet commanding. The showroom glass reflected her face, the same simple features, now glowing with quiet strength. She looked straight at the salesman. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, his palms suddenly damp. The silence inside the dealership grew unbearable. The sound of her husband's footsteps echoed, each one heavier than the last. "Would you like me to continue building the suspense toward the exact shocking climax of this scene?" The salesman's forced grin trembled at the edges. His voice cracked as he tried to speak, but no sound came out. The woman remained still, her eyes steady, her silence more powerful than words. Her husband's gaze swept over the showroom, cold and unblinking. Every salesman shrank under it. The man in the tailored suit finally spoke, his voice low, firm, commanding. "My wife came here yesterday." The room tightened. The hum of the air conditioner seemed louder. The salesman's lips parted, stammering, but the man raised a hand, silencing him. "You judged her by her clothes." Each word landed heavy, echoing off the polished walls. "You laughed at her. You pushed her out." The woman's heart pounded, each beat like a drum in her ears. The smell of leather and polish now felt suffocating, thick, unbearable. Her husband turned to her, his expression softening only for her. "Choose any car you desire." Gasps rippled through the room. The salesman shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between her and the towering figure beside her. The woman walked slowly, her steps deliberate, the sound of her sandals sharp against the floor. She passed the silver sedan, the car she had admired before. Her hand hovered over its cool surface. The salesman who had thrown her out shifted nervously, his breath shallow, his forehead damp with sweat. The woman turned her head slightly, her gaze finding him again. His face flushed red, his chest rising and falling too quickly. Every second stretched longer, the silence unbearable. The room waited, heavy with tension. "Would you like me to carry this further into the most unsettling turn, where the humiliation flips fully onto the dealership staff?" Her fingers brushed the smooth metal, cold against her warm skin. The salesman's throat made a faint clicking sound as he swallowed. She drew her hand back slowly, then turned toward the black Rolls Royce waiting outside. Her voice, calm and clear, cut through the silence. "I no longer want this car." The words struck harder than any shout. Her husband's eyes narrowed, a faint glint of approval flashing in them. He raised his hand, gesturing to the showroom floor. "We will take the entire collection," he said. The room gasped as though it had lost its breath. Every salesman stiffened, their bodies frozen like mannequins. The man's voice grew sharper. "Deliver them to my estate today." The air itself seemed to vibrate with his command. The woman's chest lifted, a strange mix of relief and power rushing through her. The salesman who had mocked her stumbled back, his face pale. His polished shoes squeaked on the tiles, the sound breaking the tension like a crack of glass. She looked at him one last time, her expression unreadable. He dropped his gaze, shame flooding his features. The dealership no longer felt like a temple of wealth and pride. It felt like a courtroom, and the verdict had already been passed. The woman turned, stepping toward the glass doors, the sunlight spilling across her face. Each step rang louder than the last, echoing in the stunned silence. The scent of polished leather clung to her dress as she walked away, a reminder of the moment she would never forget. Behind her, voices erupted in hurried whispers, frantic, desperate. Her husband's stride followed, steady, powerful, final. The Rolls Royce door opened again, its chrome handle gleaming in the light. She slid inside, the soft leather seat cradling her like a throne. "Would you like me to keep unfolding the aftermath, what happens when the cars arrive at her estate and the dealership staff must face her again?" The door shut with a deep, solid thud. The salesman flinched at the sound, as if it sealed his fate. The Rolls Royce engine purred, smooth, effortless, mocking the shallow silence left behind. Through the tinted glass, the woman watched the dealership shrink in the distance. Her reflection in the window looked different now. Not smaller. Not forgotten. But unshakable. Her husband sat beside her, his presence steady, his gaze fixed ahead. He did not speak, and yet his silence carried weight, as if every mile between them and the dealership was a line drawn in judgment. Hours later, at the grand gates of their estate, the convoy began to arrive. One by one, the luxury cars rolled in. Engines hummed. Tires whispered against stone. The driveway filled with metal and glass, polished bodies gleaming beneath the afternoon sun. She stood at the top of the steps, the wind tugging lightly at her dress. The dealership staff trailed behind the cars, their movements stiff, their eyes lowered. They carried papers, keys, forced smiles stretched thin across nervous faces. The man in the tailored suit stepped forward first, his shadow stretching across the marble. Her husband's voice rang out before anyone else could speak. "You came to deliver." The words carried the same weight as before, heavy and final. The staff nodded quickly, fumbling with their clipboards. The woman descended the steps slowly, each tap of her sandal echoing across the courtyard. The salesman who had once laughed at her clutched the keys in his trembling hand. His eyes darted upward, meeting hers for the briefest second. She stopped in front of him. The silence thickened, pressing down on every chest, holding every breath still. Do you want me to continue into the moment where she decides how to deal with the salesman directly? Her eyes held his, steady, unflinching. The keys jingled faintly in his shaking grip. Sweat traced a line down his temple. He opened his mouth, but no words came, only a shallow rasp of breath. The woman lifted her hand slowly. For a moment, he thought she might take the keys. Instead, she pushed them gently back toward his chest. The contact made him flinch, as though the metal burned. Her voice came low, calm, each word deliberate. These cars are nothing compared to dignity. The salesman's jaw tightened. His face blanched, drained of color, his shame naked in the open air. The rest of the staff shifted uneasily, waiting, watching, their clipboards heavy in their hands. She stepped closer, her presence forcing him back a single step. "You tried to strip mine away," she said. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying her words farther than she intended. "But you failed." The salesman's lips trembled, his throat moving in silent apology he could not bring himself to speak aloud. Her husband's voice broke the silence, deeper, colder. "You will remember her face every time you look at a customer." The man nodded quickly, almost bowing, his pride shattered. The woman turned from him, her dress brushing softly against her legs. She moved back toward the steps, the line of cars glistening like silent witnesses behind her. At the top, she paused, the sunlight haloing her simple figure. Her hand touched the railing, cool beneath her palm. Then she looked over her shoulder once more. The salesman froze under her gaze, as if pinned in place. "Would you like me to carry this further into the unsettling twist where the dealership staff must obey an unexpected demand from her?" Her gaze lingered, sharp and steady. The salesman's breath hitched, his knuckles white around the keys. The air seemed to tighten, as though the estate itself waited for her next words. She spoke softly, but the sound carried across the courtyard. "You will not leave yet." A ripple of unease spread through the group of staff. They shifted, eyes darting between her and her husband, unsure if they had heard correctly. Her husband gave a single nod, his approval silent but unmistakable. The woman descended one step, the marble cool beneath her feet. "You will polish every car here, by hand," she said. The words struck like a stone thrown into still water, sending ripples of shock through the courtyard. No one moved. The salesman blinked rapidly, his lips parting, but no protest dared to escape. Her husband's voice cut through the hesitation, firm, final. "You heard her." Clipboards slipped from nervous hands. The men removed their jackets, their polished shoes scuffing the stones as they knelt beside the gleaming cars. The sound of cloth against metal began, a slow rhythm of shame. The woman stood still, watching. Sunlight glinted off the Rolls Royce behind her, its surface already perfect, untouchable. But she knew it was not about the shine. It was about the lesson. The salesman who had laughed at her earlier now scrubbed at a fender, his shoulders tight, his face twisted in discomfort. Sweat dripped down his brow, splattering against the chrome he once guarded with arrogance. She turned away, her chin lifting, her voice calm once more. "Respect is polished the same way as steel. Slowly. With effort. With care. Would you like me to continue into the point where this punishment changes how the staff sees her forever?" The courtyard fell into a strained silence, broken only by the ragged breaths of the men and the steady rub of cloth against paint. The sun pressed down, hot and merciless, baking the stone beneath their knees. Each man bent lower, sleeves rolled, ties hanging loose, their crisp shirts darkening with sweat. The woman watched, her expression unreadable, her hands folded gently before her. She did not need to raise her voice. Her presence alone carried command. The salesman who had mocked her the loudest worked the hardest now, his motions frantic, desperate, as though each swipe of the cloth might erase his shame. But the weight of it clung heavier than the heat. Her husband stood beside her, silent, unshaken, his shadow long across the marble steps. When one of the younger staff faltered, wiping his brow and pausing for breath, her husband's voice cut through the air. "Do not stop until she is satisfied." The man jolted, hurried, his cloth moving faster, fear written across his face. Minutes dragged into an hour. The gleam of the cars grew sharper, almost blinding in the light. But no shine could match the shift happening within the men themselves. They no longer looked at her with dismissal. They no longer saw a simple woman in worn sandals. They saw a figure who had turned their arrogance into labor, their laughter into silence. The salesman who once told her to leave now lifted his eyes, his voice hoarse, his pride stripped bare. "Madam," he whispered, "forgive me." The words trembled in the air, heavy, fragile. The woman stepped forward slowly, her sandal brushing against the stone. She looked down at him, her shadow falling across his bowed head. "Would you like me to continue into the moment where she decides whether to grant forgiveness, or let the punishment deepen further?" Her eyes softened, but only slightly. The man's breath came shallow, each inhale sharp as if the weight of her silence pressed against his chest. The cloth hung limp in his hand, his knuckles raw from scrubbing. Around him, the other staff paused, waiting, watching, caught between their shame and their hope. The courtyard was still, the air heavy with heat and expectation. She spoke at last, her voice measured, calm, but edged with steel. "Forgiveness is not spoken. It is earned." The words struck him harder than anger ever could. His shoulders sagged, his head bowed lower, the sweat dripping from his brow into the polished reflection of the car. Her husband's gaze lingered on the man, cold and unyielding. The others bent back to their work, cloths scraping, breaths quickening. The sound of labor filled the estate once more, a rhythm of humility. The woman turned slowly, climbing the marble steps again, each stride steady, unhurried. At the top, she stopped, her hand resting on the iron railing. From where she stood, she could see them all, rows of gleaming cars, and rows of bent backs. The scene looked less like a delivery and more like a penance. Her heart pounded, not with anger, but with a strange, rising calm. She was no longer the woman who had been pushed out of glass doors and laughed at. She was the woman they now labored for, the one whose silence they feared, and whose respect they craved. Her husband glanced at her, his lips curving in the faintest hint of approval. She lifted her chin, the sunlight glowing across her face. And still, the salesman knelt, his voice breaking once more. "Please, madam, tell us when it is enough. Do you want me to continue into the moment where she finally delivers her decision, ending their punishment in a dramatic way?" The woman's gaze swept over the courtyard. The sun glared against the rows of polished cars, so bright the chrome seemed to burn. The men's hands moved slower now, their arms heavy, their backs bent as if carrying invisible stones. The salesman who spoke still knelt at her feet, his eyes lowered, his voice trapped between fear and hope. "Please, tell us when it is enough." Her fingers brushed the railing, its iron cool beneath her skin. For a long moment, she did not answer. The silence dragged, thick as smoke. Then she stepped forward, her sandals clicking against the stone, each sound sharp in the stillness. She descended the steps once more, her dress swaying lightly in the heat. The men froze, their cloths suspended midair. She stopped in front of the one who had humiliated her, her shadow falling across his bowed head. Her voice came quiet, but it cut deeper than any shout. "Enough begins when you learn to see every person with respect." The salesman's shoulders trembled. He dared to lift his head, his eyes glassy, his pride shattered beyond repair. She turned slightly, her gaze sweeping over the rest of the staff. "You may leave the cars. But you will carry this lesson." Her husband's presence loomed beside her, his silence the weight of a final judgment. The men nodded quickly, their breaths uneven, their faces drained. Keys clattered onto clipboards as they abandoned their work, retreating step by step, their shame trailing behind them like shadows. The cars gleamed in the courtyard, untouched now except by sunlight. The woman inhaled slowly, the scent of leather and polish no longer suffocating, but powerless. Her eyes softened, though her voice remained steady. "This is enough. Would you like me to continue into what happens after they leave, how her life changes once this moment of power settles into memory?" The staff shuffled back toward the gates, their footsteps uneven, their heads bowed low. The sound of gravel crunching beneath their shoes faded into the distance. When the last of them disappeared beyond the iron gates, silence settled heavy over the courtyard. The line of luxury cars remained, shining under the sun like obedient soldiers waiting for command. The woman stood still, her gaze resting on them, but her thoughts far from their glittering surfaces. Her husband turned to her, his sharp features softened by the quiet pride in his eyes. "You could have taken revenge," he said. His words carried no question, only observation. She looked at him, her face calm, her voice steady. "Revenge is fleeting. But dignity remains." The breeze stirred, carrying the scent of fresh leather from the open cars, mixing with the faint perfume of the garden nearby. She stepped down the last marble stair, her hand brushing against the smooth stone railing as though grounding herself. The woman walked slowly between the cars, her reflection shifting across their polished bodies. Each step echoed with the memory of the laughter she once endured inside that showroom. But now the echo no longer hurt. It felt smaller, distant, almost powerless. At the end of the row, she stopped, her hand resting on the hood of the silver sedan she had admired the day before. The metal was warm under her palm, alive with sunlight. Her husband's voice reached her again, low and resolute. "Every car here belongs to you. Every key answers only to your hand." She closed her eyes for a brief moment, the weight of it sinking into her chest. Not the weight of wealth, but the weight of being seen. The woman opened her eyes again, her reflection staring back at her from the shining hood. She did not see the simple figure who had once been dismissed. She saw someone unshakable, someone unforgotten. "Would you like me to carry this further into how her life transforms in the days after this moment, when whispers of the incident spread beyond the dealership?" The woman lifted her hand from the hood, leaving no mark behind, only a glimmer of light where her fingers had been. The courtyard was still, except for the faint rustle of leaves in the garden. Her husband stepped closer, his presence steady, his voice quiet enough for only her to hear. "The world will know soon," he said. She turned her head, her brows drawing gently together. "Know what?" "That you were dismissed as nothing," he replied, "and today, they bowed before you." His words hung in the warm air, as certain as stone. The woman glanced back at the cars, their perfect reflections lined up in silence, a fleet born of humiliation and turned into triumph. But she felt no hunger for the story to spread. She wanted no stage, no applause. Still, whispers began before the day ended. By evening, phone calls passed from one ear to another. A tale of a woman once mocked, now commanding respect, slipped like fire through unseen threads of conversation. The dealership manager heard first, his face stiff with dread. By nightfall, other businessmen knew, shaking their heads, wondering which of their own smiles hid the same cruelty that could one day cost them everything. And in the quiet of her estate, the woman sat by her window. The days that followed moved like quiet ripples across still water. The story traveled far, carried by whispers and retold in voices both hushed and awed. Some spoke of her as the woman who humbled an entire dealership. Others spoke of her husband's Rolls Royce, the symbol of power that silenced pride. But those who looked closer saw something else. They saw the dignity of a woman who asked for nothing but respect, and received far more than wealth could ever buy. At the estate, the cars remained lined in the courtyard, shining under sun and moon alike. Yet she rarely touched them. Her days continued as before, simple, steady, unhurried. She still walked through the garden at dawn. She still sat by the window at night, watching the wind move gently through the trees. But something within her had changed. Her steps were firmer. Her gaze no longer lowered. And when strangers greeted her, whether in shops or on quiet streets, their voices carried a new weight, careful, measured, respectful. The humiliation she had once endured had transformed into a story larger than her, a lesson etched into the memory of many. But for her, it was not the cars, not the whispers, not even the grandeur that mattered. It was the knowledge that she had stood, unshaken, in the face of scorn. That she had walked away with her dignity intact. And that was the only wealth she ever truly needed. Would you like me to now rewrite the entire story in one continuous flow, polished for a complete audio narration experience?